All right, so chapter 13 then. All he could really see was the creature's head, a scaly, iridescent blue-green face 15 feet above him. It swallowed, and Gregor caught a glimpse of rippling neck muscles. "My ball!" said Boots. Temp was already chasing after the ball, but he put on the brakes when he became aware of the enormous reptile in the jungle. Boots was not so easily deterred. She slid from the cockroach's back and ran forward, pointing at the lizard. "You eated my ball!" "No, Boots!" Gregor cried. He scrambled to his feet and tripped over a skeleton. "No! You eated my ball!" repeated Boots. She smacked her hands into the vines at the edge of the clearing, sending a vibration through the jungle. The lizard dipped its head in her direction. Temp opened his wings and flew straight at the lizard's face. But the cockroaches rarely use their wings, and he ended up hopelessly tangled in the vines several feet from his target. But isn't that sweet? He's trying to save Boots. Gregor tried desperately to free his feet from something's rib cage. "Boots, get back!" He could see the other members of the party springing into rescue mode, but how could they reach her in time? "You give Temp my ball!" Boots howled at the lizard. "You!" The lizard glared at Boots and opened its jaw wide. A frightful hiss issued from its mouth as a rainbow-colored ruff, so it's like the side stuff, shot out around its neck, making its head look 5 times bigger. "Oh," said Boots in surprise. Her own arm shot up over her head as if she had a ruff herself. "Oh!" For a moment, the towering lizard and the tiny girl were mirror images of each other, mouths open, ruffs up, eyes wide. And then someone started laughing. The sound came from the direction of the lizard and seemed to be coming from its mouth. But it was a distinctly human laugh, so Gregor knew it must have some other source. The blue-green lizard's tail flopped out of the jungle, its tip resting on the ground near Boots. The vines rustled, and someone slid down the tail. A pale, violet-eyed Underlander landed easily on his feet next to Boots. He was still laughing as he bent on one knee next to her. "So, are you a hisser too?" he asked. "No, I'm Boots," she said, dropping her arms. "Who you?" "I am Hamnet, and this is my friend Frill," said Hamnet. He indicated the lizard, whose ruff was slowly folding down. Boots considered Frill for a moment. "I is for iguana," she said. She meant iguana. It was another one of those animals like a yak. If the ABC books didn't have an ibex for the letter I, they were sure to have an iguana. "Yes, I suppose it is," said Hamnet. "Whatever an iguana is." "It eated my ball," said Boots in an injured tone. She did not mean to. "Let us see if we can retrieve it. Frill, any way to have the ball back?" asked Hamnet. Excuse me. The lizard's neck convulsed, and the ball shot out of its mouth and straight down into Hamnet's hand. He wiped it on his shirt, and Gregor noticed it was not the woven fabric generally worn by the Underlanders. Hamnet's clothes seemed to be made of reptile skin. "Good as new, if you do not mind a little hisser spit," said Hamnet. He held out the ball to Boots. "What was that thing called? When you thought something was happening that had happened before? Déjà vu?" Gregor was experiencing a very big one now. He flashed back to Luxa, down on one knee, holding out a ball to Boots in the arena, that very same half-smile on her face the first time they had met. The similarity was so striking, Gregor almost said her name. Who was he? Her dad? No, her dad was dead. But they must have been related. And what was he doing here, in the middle of the jungle? Could this guy with the lizard be their guide? Gregor looked over to the rest of the party for an explanation and found another puzzling scene. The humans were all standing like statues as if they had seen a ghost. Vicus had his arm around Sullivet, and for the first time, Gregor thought they actually looked like a married couple. Boots happily reached for her ball. Gregor remembered how Lux's fingers had held tight to that first ball, challenging Boots to take it away. You will have to be stronger or smarter than I am. But Hamnet's fingers opened readily as Boots took the ball. B is for ball, she said with a grin. And for bright, like you, said Hamnet, and gently poked her in the stomach. She giggled and looked up at Temp, who was struggling to get free from the vines. Temp, you come down. Ball is back, Boots called. Oh, Temp gave a moan. Hamnet reached up and untangled the vines from Temp's wings. He set the crawler on the ground. And what bold crawler is it who flies in the face of a hisser? Asked Hamnet. I be Temp, I be, said Temp, rearranging his wings so that they lay flat against his body. Boots scampered up on his back and tossed the ball. Off they ran, as if no stranger, no giant lizard had appeared out of the blue. Hamnet turned back and surveyed the group. The half-smile still played on his lips. There was a long silence. Oh, look, it's Hamnet. He's not dead, said Rip Red finally. The rat picked up what appeared to be a human skull and started to gnaw on it. The skull is a nice touch, Rip Red, said Hamnet. I thought so. How have you been? Said Rip Red. Remarkably well, all things considered, said Hamnet. He looked back over his shoulder at the lizard. It is safe. You may come down. The leaves stirred, and a small boy slid off the end of the lizard's tail. He did not land so easily as Hamnet had, but had to take a few hops to keep from falling over. Something was wrong about the boy. No, not wrong, just different, Gregor thought. Then it struck him. The kid had that super pale Underlander skin, but his head was covered with jet black curls, and his eyes were the green of a lime lollipop. Who was he? He didn't look like he came from either the Underland or Gregor's world. So he's kind of like a combination. Okay, his eyes are green, like some of, I know Elizabeth's are. And his hair is like really dark. No offense, Elizabeth, probably like yours, and it's curly. Whereas everyone else in the Underland has like super blonde hair and very pale eyes. And his skin looks like the Underlanders, though. The boy intertwined his fingers in Hamnet's and took in the group one by one with those strange green eyes. This is my son, Hazard, Hamnet said. Not only alive, but with a half-lander child, said Riprid. You do know how to make an entrance. Half-lander. Did that mean half-overlander and half-underlander? That would explain how he didn't seem to come from either place. Vicus slowly released Sullivet and crossed over to the newcomers. He knelt down in front of the boy and took his free hand. Greetings, Hazard. I am your grandfather, Vicus. My grandfather lives in New York City, said Hazard simply. My mother was going to take me to see him, but she died. His accent was somewhere between Gregor's own and the clipped formal speech of the Underlanders. You have two grandfathers. I am your father's father, said Vicus. Hazard looked up questioningly at Hamnet. Hamnet gave a small, non-committal nod. I didn't know I had two, said Hazard. Where do you live? I live in Regalia, said Vicus. I don't know where that is, said the boy. Are we going to visit you? You are always welcome. Vicus had to let go of the boy's hand because he was starting to cry now. He walked back to Sullivet and stayed facing away from Hamnet and Hazard, his face buried in a handkerchief. Gregor had seen him cry a couple of times before, But this time he didn't understand what was going on. If Hamnet was Vicus's son, why had Gregor never even heard his name? Where had he met an overlander woman and had a son with her? What was he doing out here in the middle of nowhere? How come Nerissa had known about him, but everybody else had, what, thought he was dead? It occurred to him that maybe Hamnet had been banished, and that's why the whole thing was such a big secret. People only got banished for really terrible things. Of course, since Eris was almost constantly about to be banished, and Gregor had been on trial for his life a few short months ago, he couldn't make any snap judgments about that. "Why come you here, Hamnet?" said Sullivan hoarsely. "You have done well enough without us for 10 years. Ran off and cared so little for us you let us believe you dead. Why come you here now?" Ran off? Gregor didn't know anyone ran off from Regalia. It was generally considered to be a death sentence to be outside the city's protection. But here was someone who had run off and appeared to be doing okay. Why had he left? Gregor was dying to know, but this seemed like a really bad time to ask. In fact, it was sort of embarrassing being here at all during such a personal moment. "I am here because I promised I would be," said Hamnet. 10 years ago, when I was leaving Regalia, a little girl crept after me and made me swear to be at this spot at this time. She told me I would be in the company of a hisser and a Halflander child. Thinking she was mad, I agreed only to quiet her. But 10 years later, still alive, and indeed finding myself in the company of a hisser and a Halflander child, I thought she might have true vision. "Where is Nerissa? Does she still live?" said Hamnet. "Not only lives, but reigns, Hamnet," said Ripred. "Reigns?" said Hamnet. "But what of..." Okay. "Your sister, Judith, and her husband were killed by rats. Your niece, Luxa, vanished battling in the labyrinth some months ago. She is presumed dead," said Sullivan. "But you have lost your right to mourn them, Hamnet. Your twin, Judith, her husband, your niece, you forsook them when you turned your back on us." Whoa. Now Gregor really didn't want to be here. There was a whole lot of bad family stuff going on. "You do not command me, Mother," said Hamnet. "Not what I do, not what I think, and never what I mourn." "So are you our guide?" broke in Lapblood impatiently, whipping a pile of bones aside with her tail. "I do not know, am I?" said Hamnet. "According to your crazy queen," Mange said. "She said you're going to get us to the Vineyard of Eyes." "Did she? And what business could a mixed pack like yourselves have there?" said Hamnet. "The prophecy of blood has reared its ugly head," said Ripred. "Supposedly, the vineyard is the cradle." His teeth broke through the top of the skull he was gnawing on and protruded through the eye sockets. "The prophecy of blood. Well, I have been gone a long time. So where's your warrior?" asked Hamnet. "Over there with his boots and the bones," said Ripred. Gregor, who was still trying to quietly work his feet out of the rib cage, stopped under Hamnet's gaze. Leave it to Ripred to introduce him when he looked like a complete fool. "That is the warrior? You are sure?" asked Hamnet. "Quite sure. Been through 2 prophecies already. Don't worry, he's a lot more competent than he seems. A bit cocky, though. He's even spreading rumors he's a rager," said Ripred. "A warrior and a rager. My mother's dream come true," said Hamnet, eyeing Gregor with positive loathing. So just like snap judgment, what Hamnet knows of Gregor, he doesn't like Gregor. That's what the loathing means, like he just hates him. Gregor kicked angrily at the ribcage and finally managed to get his feet free. He hated Ripred for bringing up the rager thing. What was it Twitch-to-Pit said a rager was? A natural-born killer? Who wanted to be that? Not Gregor. And he certainly wasn't going around talking it up. Well, in the jungle, being a rager will only triple your difficulties, said Hamnet. I hope you have gotten your powers under control. He said this last part supposedly. Yeah? Well, I hope you know where we're going, because I don't have a lot of time, Gregor shot back. He really didn't need this right now. I do not remember agreeing to take you anywhere, said Hamnet. And I don't remember asking you to, said Gregor. Man, he felt like he'd spent about half this trip mouthing off to somebody, but everybody just kept messing with him. Then it is settled. We have no use for each other, said Hamnet. Come, Hazard. He began to lead the child back to the lizard. Mange gave a growl of fury and turned on Sullivan. You're worthless, all of you. You drag us out to this ridiculous spot, and for what? Your own son will not help you find a cure for this plague. We do not need his help, said Sullivan dismissively. You don't think you need anyone's help. It would serve you right if we all left you here to rot in the jungle, Sullivan, said Lapblood. Go then, return to your caves. We will find the cure without you, said Sullivan, but do not come whining to our doors that your pups are dying. That's a promise, and here's another. They will not die alone, hissed Mange, and he crouched to attack. The next moment was a blur. The guard nearest Sullivan drew his blade as the second guard jumped on a bat and shot in the air. Lapblood sprang into place beside Mange, so Gregor knew that in a matter of minutes somebody was going to be dead. Suddenly, the guard on the ground flipped onto his back, and Hamnet stood in his place. I have to get a drink. As Mange lunged, Hamnet threw the sword so the tip of the blade plunged into a crack in the stone directly in the rat's path. Mange sheared off his whiskers on one side of his face as he veered sideways to avoid running straight into the blade. Then he plowed into Lapblood, knocking her off balance. The two rats slammed into a heap. As the guard on the bat swept down on the rats, Hamnet leaped in the air, grabbing his sword arm, and yanked him to the ground. The guard landed on his stomach with a grunt, and his sword blade snapped in two on the stone. It all happened so fast, nobody knew what had hit them. The rats and the guard slowly sat up, looking dazed. Gregor's mouth fell open. He wasn't sure exactly how, but Hamnet had stopped the fight, and no one had lost anything but some whiskers. Gregor looked over at Riprid, who was still crouching on his skull, unimpressed by the scene. I knew he'd take care of it, Riprid said with a shrug, and popped the rest of the skull in his mouth. Hamnet plucked the sword from the crack and examined it. Nothing ever changes, does it? You changed, said Sullivan softly, or why does that gnawer live? Hamnet placed the lower end of the blade across his wrist and offered her the hilt of the sword. Why do you, for that matter, he said. Because I never cease fighting, said Sullivan, taking the sword. Stop, said Vicus. Stop this, please! He mopped his face with the handkerchief and turned to his son. Hamnet, the plague is upon us. Our hospital fills with victims. The gnawers are nearing an epidemic. We must get to the Vineyard of Eyes. Can you not do this one thing for us? Hamnet, his head already shaking, was on the verge of replying when Hazard tugged on his hand. You know where that is, the Vineyard of Eyes? Hazard, you do not understand the... Hamnet began. We could take them. I could talk to the bats and the crawler, Hazard said. Is he really your father, like you're my father? The question pulled Hamnet up short. He stood there, holding Hazard's hand, his face pained. So this is like he's teaching his son a lesson here, right? Like, you are there for your family. And so he's like, Hamnet's like, I don't want to help him, but Hazard's like, he's your dad, like you're mine, right? So, like, we should help. Is he? Insisted Hazard. Yes, he is, said Hamnet. All right. Who am I taking? Not this entire mob. No, just a handful. We 3 rats, the 2 overlanders, the crawler, a couple of flyers, and your mother, said Riprid. Not my mother, nor her flyer, said Hamnet flatly. We might actually need her, boy, if we run into any trouble, said Riprid. No, not if you want my help, said Hamnet. Now he turned to Selivet and addressed her directly. Not if you want my help. Is that lady your mother? Asked Hazard wide-eyed. Because, Hamnet's, not having anything to do with Selivet. And Hazard's a little confused by that. Clear out! The rest of you, clear out! You have drawn half the jungle here as it is, shouted Hamnet, waving his arms as if to brush them aside. Kill that fire and be on your way. The human guards looked to Selivet, who gave them a nod. The fire was quenched. The guards and Selivet mounted their bats. Vicus was about to follow suit when he suddenly moved to Hamnet and locked him in an embrace. So he's hugging Hamnet. Hamnet's arms stuck out awkwardly, not returning the gesture, but not resisting it. You may come home at any time. Know this. There are many ways to occupy yourself. You would not have to fight, said Vicus. Vicus, I cannot, stammered Hamnet. You can. Only think about it. Think of the child, if something should happen to you. Vicus pulled back, almost shaking Hamnet by his shoulders. What do you do here that you could not do there? I do no harm, said Hamnet. I do no more harm. Vicus slowly released Hamnet and nodded. He crossed and mounted to his bat. Fly you high, he said to no one in particular. Selivet gave a signal, and the party of bats and humans left. So that's kind of an important thing. Hamnet's I don't do any harm here in the jungle. So what does that tell you? In Regalia, maybe he did? Bye, you, called Boots, waving goodbye. Glad that's over, said Ripred. Always some big scene with your family. You're miserable to have dinner with. I know, said Hamnet. Is Susanna dead too? No, she's fine. Whole castle of children now. The Overlander knows one of them, said Ripred. What's his name? Howard, said Gregor. He was a little overwhelmed by everything he had just witnessed. I know Howard. He was about Hazard's age when I left, said Hamnet. So how is he, Rager? The last word was heavy with disdain. So how is he, Rager? The admiration Gregor had felt when Hamnet stopped the violence faded. He's in quarantine, said Gregor, but I'll tell him you said hi if I get back. If he's still alive. Ripred's tail smacked Gregor on the back of the head. Not hard enough to knock him over, but hard enough to hurt. Watch it, the rat said. Gregor rubbed his head and scowled at Ripred, but he shut up. After all, he really didn't know what was up with Hamnet. He obviously didn't get along with Selivet. She obviously was mad he'd left Regalia, but maybe he had a good reason for leaving. Maybe Gregor should find out what had happened. Or maybe, now here was an idea, maybe he should just mind his own business and get on with finding the cure. Hamnet called them all together. They made 3 distinct groups. Gregor, Boots, Temp, and Mikey. That was one group. Hamnet, Hazard, and Frill were another. The rats were the third. So who's in charge of this thing anyway? Asked Gregor. Hamnet was their guide, but it was hard to imagine him bossing Ripred around. Not you, and that's all you need to know, said Ripred, which made Hamnet and the other rats laugh. You had something to say, Ripred? Or Hamnet? You had something to say, Hamnet? Thank you, Ripred. Now before we enter the jungle, let me make one thing clear. It is not a place for swords and claws. Eat only what you carry. Take care your flame singes nothing. Crush no berry, bruise no leaf. Tread as gently as possible on the roots, said Hamnet. What, I can't even eat a vine? Said Mange. You can, said Hamnet, if you wish to risk your life. They're just plants, said Lapblood. Some are just plants, but the ones that are harmless mimic the ones that are poisonous or constrictive or hungry, said Hamnet. Look like them, smell like them, act like them. Can you tell the difference between what you can eat and what can eat you? They can't really eat us, said Gregor uneasily. Can they? Hamnet just gave that half smile. Ask the skeletons. What does that mean? That they can really eat them, right? So end of chapter 13.